It's Christmas morning, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. A frantic 911 call cuts through the stillness of dawn. The voice on the other end belongs to Patsy Ramsey, a mother desperate, terrified, and gasping for breath. Her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, is gone. In the background, holiday lights still twinkle. Gifts sit unopened beneath the tree, but inside this wealthy suburban home, a nightmare has just begun. Hours later, police swarm the house. They find a ransom note, 2.5 pages long, demanding exactly $118,000. The note is bizarre, unusually detailed, strangely personal, and filled with phrases that sound less like a hardened criminal and more like a theatrical script. Investigators immediately sense something is off. The family is instructed to stay inside, and the search for JonBenét begins. But what they will discover in the hours to come will shake America for decades. Before we unravel the truth behind one of the most haunting mysteries in modern crime history, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to stay with us through this investigation. Your theories and comments matter, because in a case this complex, every perspective counts. And who knows, maybe the key to unlocking this mystery lies in the questions you ask. The Ramsey family was no ordinary household. John Ramsey, a successful businessman, had built a thriving tech company. Patsy, once crowned Miss West Virginia, was the polished and glamorous matriarch, always presenting a picture-perfect family image. And then there was JonBenét, their youngest child, beautiful, vibrant, and already a rising star in the world of child beauty pageants. With her blonde hair, sparkling eyes, and practiced stage presence, she seemed destined for the spotlight. But beneath the sparkle and trophies, the Ramsey home would soon become the center of suspicion, scandal, and relentless speculation. The day begins in chaos. The ransom note instructs the family not to call the police, but Patsy has already dialed 911 in a panic. Neighbors are summoned, friends arrive, and the once quiet house turns into a revolving door of people, compromising what will later be called one of the worst preserved crime scenes in American history. Hours pass. Detectives search upstairs, downstairs, and everywhere in between. But it isn't until John Ramsey himself descends into the basement that the horror is uncovered. There, in a small, windowless room, lies JonBenét's body. She has been strangled with a garrote fashioned from a paintbrush handle and rope, her skull fractured, and a child's blanket covering her lifeless form. The world would never be the same. The immediate question, who could have done this? Was it a stranger who broke in through the basement window, leaving behind a ransom note and taking the child's life before anyone noticed? Or was the killer someone inside the home? Almost immediately, suspicion falls on the family themselves. Investigators can't ignore the unusual ransom note. Its demand of $118,000, curiously close to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. They notice Patsy's handwriting bears uncanny similarities to the note. They watch the family's behavior carefully. Burke, the 9-year-old son, is kept away from questioning, shielded by his parents. The Ramseys' emotions seem unusual. Patsy hysterical at times, John strangely composed. The seeds of doubt are planted, and once they take root, they will grow into one of the most polarizing criminal investigations in history. To understand this case, we must dissect not just the crime scene, but the psychology behind it. The ransom note, nearly 3 pages long, is unlike anything experts had ever seen. Too detailed, too elaborate, too performative. Ransom notes, historically, are short, direct, and to the point. But this one, it read like a strange monologue, as though its author wanted to be heard, not just obeyed. Linguists and handwriting analysts pored over it for years, and while some claimed similarities to Patsy's handwriting, nothing definitive could ever be proven. Still, the strangeness of the note cast suspicion back into the Ramsey household, again and again. Meanwhile, the physical evidence told its own story. A broken basement window, an unidentified boot print, a fragment of DNA found on JonBenét's clothing that didn't match any family member. These clues pointed toward the possibility of an intruder, a predator who slipped in during the night and committed the crime unseen. But if that were true, why the theatrical ransom note? Why the strange demand for such an oddly specific sum of money? As investigators struggled, the media pounced. The story of a murdered beauty queen captured the nation's attention. Tabloids painted lurid headlines. Morning shows dissected the family's every move, and television hosts debated theories in real time. America was divided. Some saw the Ramseys as grieving parents unfairly demonized, while others were convinced the family was hiding a dark secret. The case became a mirror, reflecting not just one family's tragedy, but the collective obsessions of a nation desperate for answers. Through the coming years, countless theories would emerge. Some believed Patsy Ramsey, in a moment of rage or accident, caused her daughter's death and then staged a cover-up. Others believed John, perhaps protecting the family's reputation, played a role. Still others pointed to Burke, the 9-year-old brother, suggesting a tragic accident spiraled into a staged crime scene. Each theory carried weight, yet none could be proven. Law enforcement's mishandling of the initial investigation left critical evidence compromised, making a solid conviction nearly impossible. But beyond the speculation lies the chilling reality. A little girl was brutally murdered in her own home on Christmas night, and her killer, whether inside the family circle or lurking just outside it, was never brought to justice. The psychological toll on the Ramseys was immense. Patsy and John, once admired for their wealth and success, became pariahs. Bert grew up under a shadow of suspicion that would follow him into adulthood. And JonBenét's memory became entangled in a cultural spectacle that was part tragedy, part media circus. And yet, even decades later, the case refuses to fade. Advances in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, have reignited interest. New testing methods suggest the possibility of identifying unknown profiles left on JonBenét's clothing. Profiles that could finally prove whether an intruder was inside the home that night. But as with everything in this case, new answers only seem to lead to more questions. And as we peel back the layers of this haunting mystery, one fact becomes undeniable. Someone inside that house, or someone who knew its layout intimately, committed a crime so chilling it continues to haunt us nearly 30 years later. But just as the nation thought it had seen every angle, investigators uncovered something else, something buried deep in the files, that may point to a truth far darker than anyone imagined. The discovery of JonBenét's body in the basement left Boulder police with a crime scene as puzzling as it was horrifying. Almost immediately, fault lines began to form, not just in the investigation, but in the relationship between the Ramseys and law enforcement. From the very beginning, this case was clouded by errors. Detectives allowed friends and neighbors to move freely through the home, contaminating evidence. Critical hours were lost before the basement was thoroughly searched. The ransom note was handled, read, even passed around. In a case that demanded surgical precision, chaos reigned instead. And from that chaos, suspicion grew. The police had two paths to follow: the theory of an intruder or the theory of a staged crime committed by someone inside the house. Each path led investigators down different roads, fueled by conflicting evidence and competing narratives. The ransom note became the centerpiece. It was unusually long, over 300 words, and strangely theatrical. Phrases like "listen carefully" and "we're a small foreign faction" read more like dialogue from a movie than the cold efficiency of a kidnapper. And then there was the demand, $118,000. Not a round number, not a fortune, but almost exactly the amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. To police, that detail alone was suspicious. For handwriting experts, the note became an obsession. They pored over it, comparing loops, slants, and strokes to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting samples. Some claimed the similarities were undeniable, pointing to certain letters and formations that matched almost perfectly. Others argued the differences were too significant, that Patsy could not have written it. But in the world of forensic linguistics, certainty is rare. The note remained both a smoking gun and a red herring, a piece of evidence that seemed to accuse and defend all at once. While handwriting analysts debated, forensic teams searched the house for signs of an intruder. They found a broken window in the basement, which John Ramsey admitted he had broken months earlier after locking himself out. They also noted a scuff mark on the wall and an unidentified boot print near the basement window. These discoveries fueled the intruder theory, but there were problems. For one, there were no signs of forced entry anywhere else in the house. And while the basement window was open, there was little evidence anyone had actually used it that night. The dust around the window was undisturbed, the cobwebs intact. Was the intruder theory plausible, or was it a carefully constructed illusion? Then came the autopsy. JonBenét had suffered a skull fracture and had been strangled with a garrote fashioned from one of Patsy's paintbrushes. This suggested premeditation. Someone had taken time to construct a weapon inside the house. There were also signs of possible sexual assault, though forensic evidence was inconclusive. DNA found on her clothing did not match any family member, pointing once again toward the intruder theory. But critics argued that the DNA could have been contamination from the manufacturing process of the clothing itself. Once again, the evidence seemed to point in two directions at once. As investigators tried to untangle the contradictions, the media descended like vultures. JonBenét's face was splashed across every tabloid, every nightly news program. She was the child beauty queen whose life had been cut short, and her family, wealthy, polished, and seemingly perfect, made irresistible headlines. Reporters camped outside the Ramsey home. Television crews broadcast live updates. Talk shows speculated endlessly about the parents' guilt or innocence. The case became a spectacle, and with each passing day, the line between fact and rumor blurred. The Ramseys, under siege, hired attorneys and private investigators. They gave carefully managed interviews, insisting on their innocence while refusing to submit to lengthy police questioning. To detectives, this looked like avoidance. To the Ramseys, it was self-protection in the face of a biased investigation. The tension between the family and law enforcement grew toxic. Every action, or inaction, was interpreted through a lens of suspicion. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case was the psychology behind it. If this was an inside job, what could have driven a parent, or even a sibling, to commit such a heinous act? Some theorists suggested Patsy, frustrated with JonBenét during a late-night confrontation, struck her daughter in anger and then staged a kidnapping to cover it up. Others pointed to Burke, who was rumored to have had jealousy issues with his younger sister. Could an innocent sibling quarrel have spiraled into tragedy? And if so, would John and Patsy have gone to unimaginable lengths to protect their son? On the other hand, if this was an intruder, the crime took on an equally disturbing dimension. An outsider would have had to slip into the Ramsey home unnoticed, compose a lengthy ransom note using paper and pens from inside the house, then brutally kill JonBenét, all without waking anyone. Was such a scenario possible, or was it the stuff of fiction? Years passed, and the investigation sputtered. Grand juries were convened. In 1999, a Colorado grand jury actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. But the district attorney refused to sign the indictment, citing lack of evidence. The family was never formally charged. To many, this decision symbolized the entire case. Suspicion without resolution, evidence without clarity, endless questions without definitive answers. Meanwhile, new theories emerged. Some investigators suggested the crime bore the hallmarks of a sexual predator, someone who may have stalked the Ramsey family. Others argued the ransom note was too sloppy to be the work of a criminal mastermind and instead suggested a desperate attempt at staging. Books were written, documentaries produced, and each one seemed to offer a different version of the truth. But in recent years, new forensic technology has breathed life back into the case. Advances in DNA testing have allowed scientists to re-examine samples taken from JonBenét's clothing. And what they found may rewrite everything we thought we knew. The profiles did not match the Ramseys. They pointed instead toward an unidentified male. To some, this is the definitive proof of an intruder. To others, it is yet another piece of evidence that could be explained away. But one thing is certain. The mystery of JonBenét Ramsey is far from over. And just as the public began to think they had heard it all, investigators uncovered something hidden deep in the case files, something overlooked for years, but now, with modern tools, impossible to ignore. A clue that could change the entire direction of the investigation. A clue that suggests the killer may have been closer than anyone dared to imagine. The years following JonBenét's murder were a battlefield of theories, accusations, and shattered reputations. The Boulder Police Department, criticized for its mishandling of the initial crime scene, found itself at odds with the district attorney's office. While detectives leaned heavily toward the theory that the Ramseys themselves were involved, prosecutors hesitated, insisting that the evidence was not strong enough for charges. The result was a tug-of-war where truth became the casualty, and the mystery of JonBenét slipped deeper into shadows. But even amidst the chaos, the case files contained details that had gone largely unnoticed. Evidence tucked away in photographs, reports, and forensic notes. Pieces of the puzzle that, when re-examined years later, painted an entirely different picture. Among those details was the DNA profile extracted from JonBenét's clothing. Initially dismissed as inconclusive, it later became one of the most important clues in the entire case. Advanced testing methods revealed a full male DNA profile that did not match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. For investigators who believed in the intruder theory, this was their smoking gun. But skeptics warned that DNA could be transferred in countless ways, even during the manufacturing process of clothing. Was it truly the killer's fingerprint, or just another twist in an already tangled web? Then there was the ransom note, a document so strange that it seemed to defy logic. Experts in forensic linguistics spent years dissecting it. They noted that many of its phrases mirrored popular movies of the time, particularly Speed and Dirty Harry. Lines such as, "Don't try to grow a brain," John seemed lifted directly from Hollywood scripts. Was the author attempting to mimic cinematic villains, or was it a deliberate attempt to throw investigators off track? The note's peculiar phrasing, "We are a small foreign faction," raised even more questions. No such group was ever identified, and the phrase itself felt clumsy, as if written by someone pretending to be something they were not. To many, this was less the voice of a kidnapper and more the desperate invention of someone staging a crime. But if the Ramseys were responsible, what was their motive? Some believed it was an accident, a heated argument, perhaps an injury inflicted in a moment of frustration, followed by a frantic cover-up. Others speculated about darker secrets within the family, secrets the Ramseys would go to any length to protect. Yet time and again, the evidence fell short of certainty. The fracture in JonBenét's skull suggested a violent blow, yet the strangulation appeared to have been carried out after the head injury. This sequencing suggested staging, as if the garrote was applied to misdirect investigators about the true cause of death. But who would stage such a horrific act, and why? The intruder theory, while supported by the unknown DNA, carried its own contradictions. For an outsider to commit the crime, they would have needed knowledge of the house's layout, the ability to move undetected, and the audacity to compose a lengthy ransom note inside the home without fear of being caught. They would have needed to locate Patsy's paintbrush, break it, and fashion a garrote. They would have had to carry JonBenét to the basement, leave her body behind, and vanish without leaving definitive traces. Was such precision possible, or was it too elaborate for a real intruder to pull off? Meanwhile, public opinion shifted with every new revelation. To many Americans, the image of JonBenét in her pageant costumes became inseparable from a case. Her smiling photographs, once symbols of innocence, were now framed by headlines filled with suspicion and accusation. The Ramseys, once a respected family, were vilified in tabloids and talk shows. They became both victims and villains in the eyes of the public. Patsy, in particular, bore the brunt of suspicion. Her poised beauty queen persona seemed, to some, like a mask hiding darker impulses. Others defended her fiercely, pointing to her obvious grief and the toll the accusations took on her health. Behind the scenes, investigators continued to pursue leads. A registered sex offender was briefly considered a suspect. A drifter who passed through Boulder at the time was investigated. And years later, in 2006, a man named John Marcar falsely confessed to the murder. He provided chilling details about JonBenét's death, details that seemed convincing at first. But when tested, his DNA did not match, and his story unraveled. He was dismissed as a fantasist, another false lead in a case already drowning in them. Yet his confession revealed something disturbing. The case had become so infamous that it attracted imposters, people willing to insert themselves into a nightmare for attention. And yet, for all the noise, one chilling possibility persisted: that the killer had never left Boulder. That the person responsible was someone who knew the Ramsey family, someone familiar with their routines, their home, their vulnerabilities. Police files contained notes about neighbors, acquaintances, and even work associates who might have had motives, opportunities, or hidden obsessions. Each one was investigated, questioned, scrutinized. None were ever charged. As the years stretched into decades, the case remained frozen between two competing narratives. On one side, those who believed the Ramseys orchestrated a cover-up to protect themselves or their son. On the other, those who believed a cunning intruder slipped in and out of the Ramsey home, leaving behind a trail of confusion. Neither side could definitively silence the other, and so the mystery endured. But then came a breakthrough. Forensic experts revisited evidence once thought irrelevant. Tape, rope fibers, and minute traces collected from JonBenét's body and clothing. Using newer technology, they uncovered microscopic details previously invisible. And what they found suggested that the killer had left behind more than just DNA. There were patterns, fibers, and residues that pointed toward a very specific type of individual. A person whose profile did not match the Ramseys, but instead suggested someone else entirely. The revelation was startling, but investigators were cautious. For years, false leads and sensational headlines had led them astray. This time, they would move carefully, quietly, ensuring that no mistake would compromise what could finally be the truth. Yet as they pieced the evidence together, one disturbing realization emerged. The killer may have been someone hiding in plain sight, someone who had managed to slip past suspicion for decades. And just as detectives began to narrow their focus, a shocking connection surfaced, an overlooked link between a Ramsey case and another unsolved crime that had taken place years earlier. The similarities were undeniable. The methods were eerily familiar. Could it be that JonBenét's killer had struck before? Could this crime be the work of a predator who had been hunting long before the world ever knew her name? The discovery of similarities between JonBenét's case and another unsolved crime shook investigators to their core. For years, the Ramsey murder had stood as a singular mystery, one of a kind in its brutality and staging. But now, as forensic experts revisited cold case files, patterns began to emerge, patterns too precise to ignore. The earlier crime involved a young girl, attacked in her home, with indications of staging eerily similar to what was found in the Ramsey basement. Rope bindings, a weapon improvised from household objects. The details aligned like puzzle pieces, suggesting that JonBenét's killer may not have been improvising that night in Boulder. He may have been rehearsing, perfecting. For detectives long divided between the intruder and family theories, this revelation reignited the debate. If the killer had struck before, then the Ramseys could not have been responsible. But if that were true, how had he slipped through the cracks for so long? The possibility was chilling, that a predator had operated under the radar, honing his methods, leaving devastation in his wake, and vanishing into obscurity each time. Psychologists brought in to profile the potential killer painted a haunting picture. This was not the work of a typical intruder. This was someone with a fascination for control, someone who derived gratification not just from the violence itself, but from the orchestration of the scene. The ransom note, the staging, the careful construction of the garrote, all suggested a mind that craved dominance, manipulation, and the ability to bend reality to his will. It was not just murder. It was theater, a performance staged for both the Ramseys and the world at large. And yet there were still missing pieces. The DNA, though consistent, remained controversial. Some experts insisted it was conclusive proof of an outside assailant. Meanwhile, the Ramsey family's lives continued to unravel under the weight of suspicion. Patsy Ramsey, already battling ovarian cancer, carried the stigma of being viewed as the author of the ransom note. Experts in handwriting analysis were split down the middle. Some claimed her writing matched, others insisted it did not. Forensic linguists noted that the note's style carried traces of female authorship, while others pointed to calculated attempts at disguise. Patsy's life became a performance in itself. Every television appearance, every interview, scrutinized for signs of deception. Was her grief genuine, or was it an elaborate mask? For the public, the line blurred. John Ramsey, meanwhile, tried to salvage what remained of his reputation and business career. But no matter how far he moved, the shadow of JonBenét's murder followed. Every deal, every public appearance, was haunted by whispers. The couple had been cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, yet the stigma lingered. Once a family of prestige and promise, the Ramseys had become unwilling exiles in their own country. But the most haunting figure was Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother. For years, speculation swirled about his possible involvement. Some theorized that a sibling quarrel had escalated fatally, and that his parents had staged the scene to protect him. Though never charged, Burke grew up in the long shadow of suspicion. Decades later, when he gave rare interviews as an adult, viewers dissected his every word, his every smile, searching for hidden guilt. But what they found was not clarity, only more questions. Was he simply a man scarred by tragedy and public persecution? Or was his strange demeanor the residue of something darker? The case itself became bigger than Boulder, bigger than Colorado. It became a mirror of America's fears, our obsession with innocence lost, with the darkness that could lurk inside picture-perfect homes. JonBenét's pageant images became iconic, not just because of who she was, but because of what they represented. The fragility of safety, the ease with which it could shatter. Yet behind the sensationalism, the investigation pressed on quietly. Forensic experts examined the fibers from the duct tape and ligatures, tracing them to possible sources. Some fibers matched the paintbrush found in the basement. Others appeared to come from materials not native to the Ramsey home. Could these fibers have been carried in by the killer, fragments of his world accidentally left behind? If so, they could be the breadcrumbs leading to his identity. Then came a chilling hypothesis. What if the killer had been inside the Ramsey home before the night of the murder? There were reports of windows left open, of an unlocked basement door, of unexplained noises heard in the weeks leading up to the crime. Perhaps the killer had scouted the house, familiarized himself with its layout, and waited for the perfect night. This theory explained how he knew where to find materials for the garrote, how he could navigate the maze-like basement in darkness. It also suggested something even more terrifying. JonBenét's family may have unknowingly lived alongside their predator. The idea that the killer had studied them, observed them, perhaps even attended the same church or community events, was almost unbearable. But as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a troubling pattern of crimes in the region: break-ins, attempted assaults, and voyeuristic intrusions that mirrored aspects of the Ramsey case. None had escalated to murder before. But what if, in JonBenét's case, the intruder had finally gone further? Still, the truth refused to reveal itself fully. Each lead opened a door into another labyrinth. Each discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Was the killer a cunning outsider who had slipped away under the cover of night? Or was he someone the Ramseys knew? Someone whose presence in their lives had gone unnoticed, or perhaps deliberately ignored? The answer, some investigators believed, might lie not in Boulder at all, but in a chillingly similar case from a neighboring state. A young girl, missing under mysterious circumstances, her body found days later with signs of staging that echoed the Ramsey basement. The two cases, though years apart, carried hallmarks so specific they could not be coincidence. The same type of ligature, The same use of a household item as a weapon. The same suggestion of a stage scene designed to mislead. And as the files from this second case were reopened, investigators noticed something else. An individual who appeared in both timelines. A man whose name had surfaced briefly in the Ramsey investigation, dismissed as insignificant at the time. But here he was again, connected to another tragedy. A man who had slipped through the cracks, blending into the background, his involvement overlooked. The realization was chilling. Had the killer been hiding in plain sight all along? Had the investigation been misdirected by its obsession with the Ramseys while the real predator walked free? Detectives began to trace his movements, piecing together fragments of his past. And what they found suggested a disturbing pattern stretching far beyond Boulder, far beyond Colorado. A series of incidents scattered across states, each one bearing the subtle fingerprints of the same dark hand. If this man was truly connected, then JonBenét's murder was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of something larger, a pattern of violence, carefully hidden, woven into the fabric of ordinary neighborhoods. More often, they study their targets, wait for the right moment, and then pounce. Could JonBenét have been the victim of a long-studied plan? If so, then the ransom note became even stranger. Why leave a written message at all? If the intruder's true goal was murder, why waste time writing 3 pages under the risk of discovery? Some criminologists offered a chilling possibility. Perhaps the note was written before the crime even took place. Perhaps it was prepared days in advance, rehearsed, even practiced. If that were true, then JonBenét's murder wasn't an improvised attack, but the climax of a fantasy years in the making. A fantasy nurtured by someone who blended into the background of her life. Unseen, unnoticed, waiting. Investigators began revisiting older cases, assaults, kidnappings, unsolved murders, in search of parallels. They found troubling similarities. A young girl in another state, attacked in her home by an intruder restrained with makeshift bindings. Another case where a ransom note was left demanding money, but no abduction ever occurred. Each case bore echoes of JonBenét's murder, as though the same hand might have been at work. Yet no suspect emerged with ties strong enough to bridge the gap. Still, the whispers grew. Was JonBenét's killer a serial predator? Public fascination with the case only intensified. Documentaries pitted theory against theory. Internet forums turned into battlegrounds where armchair detectives fought over every photograph, every interview, every forensic detail. Theories became belief systems, and belief systems became obsessions. People staked their reputations, their careers, even their friendships on the version of the truth they believed. In many ways, the case had become unsolvable not because of lack of evidence, but because of too much noise. Too many competing narratives, too many entrenched sides unwilling to concede ground. And in that chaos, the killer, whoever they were, remained hidden. But behind closed doors, law enforcement was not idle. Quietly, a task force was formed to apply the newest investigative methods to the case. Their mandate was simple: strip away the theories, the noise, the endless speculation, and focus solely on the evidence. Piece by piece, they reconstructed the crime scene with modern forensics. And what they found began to shift the balance of possibility. Microscopic fibers on the tape, unidentified shoe prints in the basement, a sequence of injuries that suggested not rage, but ritual. The task force began to suspect that the crime was neither a panic cover-up nor a clumsy break-in. It was something far darker, something almost ceremonial. And then came the discovery that would alter the course of the investigation. A reanalysis of trace evidence connected the fibers found on JonBenét's body to an object that had long been overlooked in the Ramsey home. An object that raised disturbing questions about whether the killer was truly an outsider or someone who had been trusted inside those walls before. The implications were staggering. If the object belonged to someone the Ramseys knew, then the killer was closer than anyone imagined. As the task force prepared to confront this possibility, one question loomed. Had the truth been hidden in plain sight all along? The re-examination of trace evidence inside the Ramsey home had already begun reshaping the investigation. The discovery of microscopic fibers that matched an object within the house suggested something chilling. That the killer may not have been a faceless outsider creeping in from the winter night, but someone who had stood inside those walls before. An acquaintance, a family friend, perhaps even someone the Ramseys themselves trusted. Suddenly, the case no longer felt like a struggle between the intruder theory and the family did it theory. It began to look like something more sinister, an intersection of both. Someone from outside, yet close enough to pass unnoticed. The object in question was mundane, something no one had paid much attention to for years. But in the sterile confines of the forensic lab, it became something else, a silent witness. It raised a terrifying possibility that JonBenét's killer had not chosen her at random, but had been in her orbit, watching, waiting. If true, this was no burglary gone wrong, no moment of impulsive violence. It was premeditated predation, carried out by someone who knew the rhythms of the household, someone who could calculate how much time they had before panic would spread. But there was another layer that made the task force uneasy. The ransom note. For years, it had been debated to exhaustion, dismissed by some as a red herring, believed by others to be the key to everything. Now, looking at it through the lens of this new possibility, the note seemed to transform. The handwriting, the strange references, the bizarre length, all of it suggested not panic, but theater. Whoever wrote it had not only wanted to confuse investigators, they had wanted to be read. They wanted their words to be pored over, obsessed over, argued over. The note wasn't just a message, it was a performance. And the killer had succeeded. Decades later, we were still talking about it. Psychological profilers offered a disturbing interpretation. The killer was someone who thrived on control, not just over their victim, but over everyone who followed. To them, the crime was a masterpiece, and the investigators, the public, even the media were their unwilling audience. They had staged a drama in which everyone played a role, except the killer, who remained hidden in the wings, untouchable. For such a personality, the true satisfaction wasn't just in the act of murder, but in the endless confusion that followed. Every debate, every theory, every headline was part of their victory. The closer investigators looked, the more they began to see connections, small, unsettling links to other crimes that had baffled law enforcement across the country. A home invasion in the Midwest, where a child was bound in a disturbingly similar fashion. A ransom note left in another case, eerily echoing the strange phrases found in the Ramsey note. A pattern seemed to emerge, faint but undeniable. A predator who had moved in shadows, leaving fractured puzzles behind, as though daring the world to put the pieces together. But if this was true, then JonBenét was not the first victim, and perhaps not the last. Yet, despite these connections, no definitive suspect emerged. Names were floated, investigated, dismissed. Some died before answers could be found, taking their secrets with them. Others slipped through the cracks of insufficient evidence. Over time, frustration mounted, and yet, the case remained alive. Bolder authorities periodically reminded the public that the investigation was active and ongoing. New DNA technologies were tested. New experts were brought in. But for every step forward, the case seemed to take 2 steps back, swallowed by its own legend. For the Ramsey family, the weight never lifted. Patsy died insisting on her innocence, her voice weakened by illness but defiant to the end. John, left behind, carried the burden of decades of suspicion and unanswered questions. Burke, dragged unwillingly into the glare of public judgment, tried to live a life shadowed by whispers of guilt that had never been proven. The family had been fractured by tragedy, then crushed under the relentless machinery of public speculation. And still, the question lingered. If not them, then who? Every few years, hope flared with the possibility of a breakthrough. Advances in forensic genealogy led to high-profile arrests in other cold cases, most famously the Golden State Killer. When that arrest was announced, many wondered if JonBenét's case would be next. But the DNA in her case remained a subject of dispute, its origins contested, its reliability questioned. It was the cruelest twist of all. that the one thing everyone believed could bring closure might not be trustworthy at all. As the 30th anniversary of JonBenét's death approached, the story continued to haunt the American psyche. She had become frozen in time, a 6-year-old beauty queen in a tiara, smiling in photographs, while her murder remained an open wound. Each year brought new specials, new books, new promises of answers that never came. And each year, the silence of that basement seemed to echo louder. But in the quiet corridors of the Boulder Police Department, behind doors that the public would never see, whispers persisted of something more. Unreleased evidence, leads never disclosed, a suspect profile that had been quietly refined over years of study. Some believe the authorities knew more than they admitted, that they had long harbored suspicions about a specific individual, but lacked the final piece to move forward. To others, this was nothing more than another conspiracy layered onto a case already drowning in them. But if it were true, then the killer's identity might not be a mystery to everyone. And so, the case endures. The story of JonBenét Ramsey is not just a crime. It is a labyrinth, a riddle that has ensnared investigators, experts, and ordinary people alike for nearly 3 decades. At its center lies a child, silenced before her life had truly begun, and a question that refuses to fade. Who killed her? And until that day of reckoning comes, if it ever does, the case of JonBenét Ramsey will remain what it has always been, a story without an ending. A mystery frozen in the dark of that basement. A name etched forever into the shadowed history of American crime. Because somewhere out there, someone still knows the truth. If you believe JonBenét's case will one day be solved, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the truth has been hidden all along? Or is the killer still out there, waiting in silence? If you found this story gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime mysteries that keep you questioning long after the screen fades to black.